One thing that I really liked from watching the Pensado's plays, and Dave Pensado is pretty awesome, obviously A-list mega engineer dude, and pretty fun, cool guy anyway. It appears on his videos. Not that I know the guy or anything, but like a big lesson I got from him was when he's playing around with even something like a hi-hat or just like a loop, like a silly loop that's barely in the mix anyway, is he will keep messing with it. He'll duplicate 5 tracks of it and distort it this way and distort it that way and just add a little bit of this and a little bit of that. He really takes the time to enhance that. And watching him do that on loops and stuff was one thing. That's just kind of monkeying around with electronic pop type stuff. Okay, whatever. When I saw him do the same thing with like metal guitars, I was like, oh, this guy just didn't. It goes back to what I was talking about in the first video about there is one school of thought that says, yeah, just slap that 57 on the Marshall cabinet, call it a day. And that has worked on a lot of records. But we're doing metal. We already know how important production is for this gig. We already know that we need to take our really great tracks and make them greater, where there has to be a kapow to this thing all the time. So let's kind of take a look at what we can do to enhance our particular tracks here. And we're using the Axe FX. It's a pretty cool sound. I love that box. Some people hate the thing, hate the philosophy of it, whatever. All I know is it makes my job easier, and I can focus more on music and less on cussing a guitar speaker. Last week we had a freaking mic stand that moved like 6 inches. It fell down because it's a good mic stand. It's just getting old, needs some new thingies. But anyway, the new way of working to me is just so much better. To each his own. Anyway, so we got this guy. Actually, for all I know, that might be the Rivera. I can't remember. How about that for the world of modern metal production? I have no idea if that's a real amp or not. I can't tell you. I just don't know. I guess I can look at the dates and stuff. But regardless, here's our guitar sound. And that's so far doing nothing. Again, I'm thinking maybe that is Rivera. Just a hunch. All right, so what I'm going to do is I want more harmonic content in that thing. I want it to be meaner. I want to hear more stuff, more zhang and jing. And I want to do it without EQ at first. I don't really hear a need for EQ right here. I don't think I have any on there. No. So what I'm going to do is I've played around with a lot of different things. Like I'm always interested how I can get more harmonic content. How can I emphasize the good stuff and less of the mud and the harshness or anything like that? I'm just trying to get more, I guess, clarity. This is something I want on everything I do. And it's the reason a lot of hardware gear is so popular is because a lot of the hardware, the really colored stuff has this inherently. It, by accident, adds a bunch of good junk by distorting the crap out of it. So I played around, and this is just a stock Cubase distortion type of thing, or duh tube is what they call it. More like duh dummies. Old grandpa joke. None of you guys will get it. Okay, I think the best way for me to show you this, I was hoping I could solo one track and show you, but we'll just kind of work in pairs, and I'll have to turn the plugins off and on really quickly. With this duh tube thing is I'm trying to bring out, I wouldn't call it fizz so much, but maybe a little. I think we're a little bit not fizzy enough, just a hair. But I'm just looking for an overall harmonic content thing we can pull out of these things. So let's listen to these two guitars, which are just hard panned with nothing. There's something good about that. I mean, that's a good tone. But there's also something that just kind of sounds a little bit too safe. So let's see if we get more dangerous. So there's nothing wrong with that tone, but it just seems like it was what people 8 years older than me were doing when I was 18. Like, I don't know if you know what I mean. Like, I wanted Rammstein, and they kind of just sounded a little bit too nice. And I think we can get a little more brutal with it on. I'm not sure if using Dud Tube has made us brutal or not, but I do like where it went with a little bit. And we are getting a hair gravelly. There is a thing. We're definitely doing some work here. And I keep hearing that, and I don't know if it's good distortion or bad distortion. I always kind of struggle with that sometimes. And when it's not obvious, I guess it doesn't matter a whole lot. So just use your own judgment. Right now, it just seems like it's a hair much, so I'm going from a balance of 43 to a balance of 40. Not a big deal. Just me, mostly for my own psychological shortcomings of saying, okay, that might be a little bit screwy. Let's just not, just tap it down a little bit. And it's definitely prettier without it, but I want that. I think in the mix, everything that makes that kind of sound big to me right now, because I've turned the Dud Tube off, it gets a little bit bigger. The problem is that's all useless in a mix. That's crap that really needs to get out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that in there. And by having less crap that we don't want in there, it allows us to turn our guitars up louder, which was something we'll discuss here in a little bit. Okay, another thing that I really like to do is the old Haas effect. And I think actually I'm using slightly longer delays than normal. It's not technically Haas but I got 20 millisecond delay on one side and a 40 millisecond delay on the other. I think I started out with 9 and 16 or something like that. I often use prime numbers. I don't remember why, but I read a paper on it and it made sense. To each his own. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I got these going to a guitar bus. Let's see where that is. Okay, there it is. So I had this, and this is what we end up with. Yeah. Okay, and this is going to be really subtle. I just blended this in a little bit, and it adds a little stereo dimension. I'm thinking that by panning 100%, we're not going to hear these as much as I want. And this is something I've kind of gotten into recently, where I only pan to 85 or 90% to kind of make room for whatever effects I've got on the edges. Sometimes we'll actually widen just the effects. That's another story, but... And so you can tell that's a really powerful trick there. And in context, it can do some real meanness. But if you go too far with it, you start sounding like you've got an effect on there, like some kind of comb filtering or chorus, flange, whatever it is. And so you got to be real careful not to overdo that. And it's one of those things where the more you think about it, the more you keep turning it down. But I'm just going to leave it in kind of subtly and see what that does. All right, so let's start looking at this stuff in context. I wanted to be able to focus on the guitars, but ultimately I never really cared too much what it sounds like by itself because it doesn't matter to me. Okay, here we go. And right now the bass is pissing me off. The bass isn't right at all. I mean, it's not a bad tone, but just not right. So. And I'm going to go ahead and add some reverb to these guitars. And I've covered this in other videos, I believe, but I really, I think the reverb on metal guitars is highly underrated. And you got to be real careful with it. You can't just do it, just be silly and put some 6-second plate on it or something like that. But there is something about ambience that can be very beneficial. And again, it's not for everybody probably, but it's one of those things that I think everyone should at least play with. And there is some value to it some of the time. Now, I'm going to try a really big reverb here, or at least bigger than I expect to work. Again, Clayman, In Flames Clayman is the one to check out for metal guitar reverb. It's not on every song, but they use it a lot. All right, let's just see if this worked. I think this reverb is going to be a bit large, but... what's happened here is the guitar volume stayed the same, and then I added this reverb, and you can hear it doing a little something, and it maybe livens it up a little bit. But in high levels, it just never worked. I had to keep turning it down. So it's definitely the wrong reverb for what we're doing here. But what I'm looking for is the kind of reverb that a room sound or whatever, a room sound is probably a better word for it, where when I send a whole bunch of level to that reverb, I still go, In other words, I'm looking for a reverb, a room sound that almost could work 100% affected, and so that it's a lot more subtle in terms of the processing it's doing. So I'm using a convolution here. That was a lexicon sound I use for all kinds of things. Probably not the best choice for electric guitar. So let me just try room B. Where are you at, New York? Okay, let's try this one. I can't remember which one I used, but I want something probably in the 1 second ballpark. And this says 2 seconds, so it's probably too much. But let's see what it does. Yeah, we're a little bit muddy. We need to get that RT60 down a little bit. So let's look at reference, and let's see if we can find an impulse. I could have swore it was New York. One of these Studio Bs. Maybe it's LA. Cubase has the most awful way of labeling. They're really big on country. Japanese concert hall. That doesn't tell me anything. How's that different than an Austrian one? You know, how about describing the freaking room? Anyway, I don't understand there. I guess it's a German thing, maybe? I don't know. Okay, anyway. Okay, what I've done, because I just took a second here to browse through all my impulses that I've got within Cubase. I have others as well, but I really wanted a real room. A lot of my impulses are actually reverb boxes that I can't afford. Anyway, so what I did is I actually did a pre-fader send, which is this little orange button here, and I turned the dry guitars down so that all I'm hearing is the 100% of the room sound. And so let's listen to that real quick. And that reverby sound right there, while obviously very ambient, is actually quite useful. It's if I had to use that in a mix with like something happened and a mic was broken and whatever, and we're stuck with that, we could almost make that work in a real rock mix. And again, it's a little bit unusable, but a lot more usable than some of the other reverbs that go on for 10 seconds and all this business. So now that I've picked one, and I could probably find one that's more ideal, that feels like it's a guitar like in a bathroom, which is kind of what I was going for, give or take. But now I can go ahead and blend in my real guitar sound with this one and see what happens there. So let's go back to where we were. I'm on headphones, so who knows if that's actually working right. Monitors have a different opinion of that for sure, 90% of the time. But what I was looking for there was a kind of I would say a 50-50 blend where I start hearing this 3D dimension, and I can hear the guitars being pulled back and kind of getting more of a wall of a sound thing. That whole thing with the mic, being, inches from a speaker, no one sticks their face down there, at least no one with any sense. So we're used to hearing guitars, at least I am as a listener, as a music fan, back a little bit. So we utilize that close sound, but for me, I like to bring it back a little bit. I like to spread it out, and I think we can get some real extra stuff happening when we do it just right, and we get a good blend of I'm kind of thinking that the guitars in the room are kind of like drums. They're the same thing. They're you can't have one without the other necessarily. I mean, you kind of can. But I think a lot of guys with their hyper dry guitars are really, really missing out. And there's a chance to get some extra just raw and balls and meanness if you do it right. So let's go ahead and listen to see how our guitars are doing in context now. And just a hair reverb, and I'm hearing that the element of that impulse I didn't like. It was just a hair too much reverb time. I wish I could turn that down, and normally I would, but for a video, you get the point here. But I'm going to turn it down just a hair because of that factor. Okay, so let's recap a little bit. And our guitars, which weren't bad before, but maybe just a hair safe and a hair boring, we added some harmonic content with Duh Tube, which is just your cheapo Cubase type of plug-in, kind of an exciter-y kind of thingamajig. And there's a million ways you could go about that. We could have overcompressed them or done other things to bring that up, but I like that Duh Tube thing a little bit. And then we didn't really need any EQ or anything like that to speak of. We did use the Haas effect, or variation of it at least, to get some stereo width on this thing to kind of just spread it out and give it a 3D quality. And then we added an impulse to kind of just pull the guitars back and just to make them feel like they're like a freaking tidal wave getting ready to knock you down, as opposed to being like something right in your ear, I guess. And the combination of that is we're starting to get real brutal. Now let's work on that bass.